We gather here as a faith community today to celebrate the life of Richard John Sullivan, or more affectionately known to me as Uncle Dickie. This is a time that we gather that's a time of mixed emotions. It's a time of mixed emotions because we mourn the loss of someone who we love very dearly. But at the same time, we rejoice in the life that he lived and the life that he now has. Growing up as a young man or young boy, Uncle Dickie was someone who was very special to me. We had a lot of the same likes. You could say that Uncle Dickie really, in a lot of ways, served as a mentor to me. Uncle Dickie was the first person who I ever knew who was a worldly person, because of all of his trips that he had taken in the military and all the countries that he had visited, sometimes with his family, sometimes not with his family. He would tell me about all these foreign places that he had been to. I used to remember as a young boy listening in fascination very vividly as he would sit there and tell me about these faraway places, about the people there and the country there and the culture there and what it was like. And you know, for a young boy growing up in LaBouche, Louisiana, that was a big deal, because these were places that I would never be able to see or never be able to go. But I was able to learn about them through his eyes and his stories. Uncle Dickie and I shared a passion and love for agriculture, and so much so that I went on and I spent a career in agriculture. And most of you know that Uncle Dickie's farm is just a few miles down the road here. And he would oftentimes ride to the farm from his house in Alexandria. And many times he'd stop by the house and he would say, "Would you come ride with me?" So we would go and we would ride with him. We'd go out to the farm and we'd do all kinds of things. We'd work in his garden. And when I say garden, I mean garden, because it was humongous. If they made seed for it, he grew it. Sometimes we would work his cows. Sometimes we would split firewood. Sometimes we would work on his tractors. Dickie Sullivan was the only man that I ever knew that owned 5 tractors, and none of them would never run. So if you had to use a tractor for something, the first thing you had to do was spend half a day working on it so that you could use it. I remember little things about Uncle Dickie. Little things about, like, how he used to drink his coffee. Wherever Uncle Dickie went, he always brought a coffee bottle with him. It didn't matter if he was just going down the street to the store or if he was going 10 states away, he brought a coffee bottle with him. And he'd pour himself a cup of coffee, or as he would say, just a little whistle better. And he'd pour it in that cup, and I promise you, he'd let it sit there for an hour until it became ice cold, and then he would drink it. Now, I can't stand cold coffee. So I remember one day asking him, "Uncle Dick, why do you drink cold coffee?" And he explained to me that there was a reason behind this. He said that when he was in the Navy, that when he would get up in the mornings, when it was his time for chow, by that time they had already run out of coffee on the ship. So what he had learned to do was to pour himself a cup of coffee the evening before and put it in his locker. So the next morning when he woke up, he'd have a cup of coffee. He said, "I didn't necessarily like cold coffee, but it was better than no coffee. So I drank cold coffee for so long that I learned that that's the way that I like it." Uncle Dick loved doing things the old-fashioned way. He even taught me the art of making syrup. Now, there are not many people my age who could say that they know how to make syrup, but I'm one of them. And I can thank Uncle Dickie for that. And it was always a big annual event when it come time to make syrup. And it was always the week of Thanksgiving. I mean, that's something you can just mark on your calendar. That's when it was going to happen. It took me several years later to understand why it was that week. It was that week because that was the week that he could get the most free labor to help him make the sermon. But Uncle Dickie was a real stickler about things. He liked to do things his way. Especially he liked to do things the way that he done them as a kid. Now, it didn't matter that there was a lot easier way or a lot more productive or efficient way. That didn't matter. Dickie done it the way Dickie wanted to do it. So I guess in a way you can say that Dickie was a little bit strong-willed. And that's a real nice way of saying he was just a little bit stubborn. But after all, he was a Sullivan, so he couldn't help it. I remember one time as a young kid, Uncle Dick decided that he was going to teach me to weld. And Uncle Dickie was a tremendous welder. For those that didn't know him in that respect, he was a tremendous craftsman. And there was nothing he couldn't build. If he could see it, he could build it. But he decided one day that he was going to teach me how to weld. So we're at his shop, and he takes out a piece of flat iron, he lays it out, and he begins to give me lessons. He showed me how to strike the arc and how to determine when the rod was too close to the metal or too far from the metal, and how to make the right circular motions and everything. And he showed me a couple of times, and he said, "Okay, Mike, your turn." So I put the helmet on, and I done exactly the way he told me to. And I made those circles, and I made the arc just like you're supposed to. And when I get through and I pull off my helmet, and my goodness, it looked terrible. And he looked at it and he said, "Hey, Mike, that's pretty good. I'm going to make a welder out of you yet." I remember one time I was helping. I think he used to fabricate, make, and put up metal buildings. One of the things that he did. And I was helping him one summer, and we were making some trusses. He had them laid out on the concrete floor, and we were putting the braces, little sucker rod braces, in between the trusses. And we were welding, and I was helping him. He'd weld one, and weld the next, and weld the next. And finally he said, "Okay, Mike, it's your turn." Me? I said, "Yeah, come on. It's your turn to weld one." So I put my hood on, and I done exactly the way he had taught me to, and I worked and I welded and everything. And when I pulled my helmet off to look at my handiwork, oh Lord, it was terrible. It actually looked like I had welded in my hand and had thrown it on there. And he looked at it and he said, "That's pretty good. That's pretty good." But I did notice later on that evening, when he didn't think that I was looking, he went back and re-welded it. Uncle Dickie was a man of service. He was someone who spent his life in service of others. Some of the previous speakers have talked about a little bit about his military service, but I'd like to spend a little bit more talking about his service to our country. When he was 16 years old, he enlisted and signed up to serve in the U.S. Coast Guard and the Merchant Marines. Now, the story I heard when I was growing up was that you had to be 18. So he lied about his age to get in. And I confirmed that with Dad today. So he served in the Merchant Marines until they discovered that he wasn't old enough, and they kicked him out. Remember now, this was the height of World War II. But as soon as he turned 18, he went and he enlisted in the Navy. He spent 10 years in the Navy. And what Uncle Dickie did in the Navy was, he was an underwater, deep-sea welder. Now, I'm not a very smart guy, but now I know enough to know that if you've got electricity in this hand, and you're going down in the water, something ain't right about that. But he did that. As ships were damaged and were brought into dry dock to be repaired, he would be the ones that would go down deep into the ocean to the bottom of the ships and weld. He spent 10 years doing that. upon being discharged from the Navy, he enlisted in the Air Force. He spent an additional 11 years, I believe, in the Air Force, serving his country. Someone said it earlier, and it certainly is fitting that this week we celebrate veterans. There's no more of a veteran than the man that we see here before us today. And we've also learned about how he served others in his work with acts of charity through the Masonic Lodge and other organizations, about how he cared for other people. Someone mentioned to me last night, or made a comment to me about how many people there were that came to the funeral home last night for visitation. And my comment was, well, I would have expected nothing less than that. And here you see such a fine man who has done so much in his life, who has given a lifetime of service, who has always treated people with honesty, dignity, and fairness. Why would they not come? Then after he got out of the service, he went back to school and gets a degree in education, and then spends another career, 20 years, teaching high school, shaping the lives and minds of thousands and thousands of young men and women. This was certainly a man who had given his entire life to service to others. Uncle Dickie was someone who loved life. He loved his children. He adored his grandchildren. And he especially adored his great-grandchildren. No matter when I would see him or what we would be doing, he would always have to give me an update of what all the grandchildren and grandchildren were doing, where they at, and what they were doing, and what was going on in his life. And you could tell that they were so special to him, that they were the light of his life. But there comes a time in every person's life when we have to deal with our own mortality. There comes a time in life when each of us have to face the day that we face today. And we as a community, as we try to reach out to those who weep and mourn, and we wonder, what can we say and what can we do to help make that hurt go away? How do we make sense of what has happened? Someone who is so wonderful, so loving, so giving, so caring, who spent a lifetime of service, how do we make sense out of that? How do we make sense that God could call someone that great home to be with him? I'd like to read for you now a scripture reading. And this scripture reading is from Luke's Gospel. It's from the 20th chapter of Luke, verses 27 through 38. Some Sadducees, those who deny that there is a resurrection, came forward and put this question to Jesus, saying, "Teacher, Moses wrote for us, if someone's brothers die, leaving a wife but no child, his brother must take the wife and raise up descendants for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married a woman but died childless. Then the second and the third married her. And likewise all the 7 died childless. Finally the woman also died. Now, at the resurrection, whose wife will that woman be? For all 7 had been married to her." Jesus said to them, "The children of this age marry